Okay, so this is the introduction to Hamlet, as per what will be studied for Module B, which is the critical study of text for advanced English. So, just to start with, to go from what the syllabus is asking, you want to have a look at what gives a text textual integrity. Okay, so to start with, just write that down as a question. Okay, so what gives a text textual integrity? And add there and value. So the whole question is, what gives a text textual integrity and value? Question mark. Okay, so to start with, let's just define what textual integrity is. Okay, so textual integrity, well actually let's look at what integrity is. Okay, so the definition of integrity, people usually think of integrity as something, you know, like someone's a good person, they're a moral person, like they have good values. For example, I don't know, if you lost your phone and somebody found it and tracked you down and gave it back to you, then we usually consider that person as having integrity. Okay, that's not really the integrity we're talking about here. So it's not really about whether the text is good or bad necessarily, but more so whether it has the components necessary to be a valued or an effective text. Okay, so the actual definition of integrity is the state of being whole and complete. Okay, in the syllabus, it's defined something like the cohesion of a text. Okay, but how best to understand it is to think about like the structural integrity of a building. Okay, so there's certain components that go into the building of, you know, a building that give it the ability to stand up and do what it was supposed to do, which is allow people to go in and out, and, you know, and if it has structural integrity, so things like it's got a proper foundation, it's been built properly with, I don't know anything about that, but, you know, like particular kinds of bricks and cement and in the right places and all of that, then we would say the building has structural integrity. Therefore, it is an effective building. It can be used, not just going to fall over or break in certain places and so on. And sometimes obviously they do, but then usually again, that's an issue of the structural integrity that it has. Okay, so when we're looking at a text, we're looking at what are the components, like the foundational components that go into a text to make it effective and make it like last throughout time and have people, you know, get value out of it and appreciate it and possibly reinterpret it, which is something that you may be doing. So when we're looking at a text, the core foundational things we're looking at to achieve or determine whether it has textual integrity, there's two things. Okay, so the first thing is the ideas that it portrays. Okay, now these ideas are usually going to be something to do with, or not usually, they're going to be something to do with the human experience. Okay, so, and humanism, just so you know, underpins the entire syllabus. Okay, so when you look at something like discovery, you're looking at, okay, so humans, like it's like an ongoing thing to make discoveries. It's a lifelong process. It can be confronting, it can change you and expand or broaden your view of the world, etc. And, you know, so that's sort of where that comes from as well. And similarly with all the other modules, it's very much based on the human experience of whatever they're talking about. So here, when we're looking at critical study of text, you're looking at what human experience, otherwise really known as themes, are being presented in this text that make it an effective text and something that we can appreciate, reinterpret, last throughout time, etc. So what we're looking at there, so a couple of examples we're going to have there are things like chaos versus order. You're going to have things like, you know, pursuit of revenge, things such as, you know, the search for meaning, you know, doubt, uncertainty, things like, what else? Love, hate, etc. You know, family relationships, all of that. So as you can see with those kinds of ideas, they very much last throughout time. Okay, so regardless of the particular era or context that you're in, those particular experiences are going to be common, and as you know, you'll have certainly had those at some point or another in some other circumstance. Okay, so that's the first thing that we're looking for in relation to what gives a text integrity or makes it have value and the ability to last throughout time. So that's the first thing. The second thing is always going to be the how part, which is what techniques are used to actually illustrate those key ideas of human experience or human nature. Okay, so when we're looking at something like Hamlet, you want to be looking at something more specific to a drama. Okay, so things like the use of soliloquies, things like the use of dramatic irony, and then you've got obviously your motifs, you've got your characterization, metaphor, simile, etc. Okay, so and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a sheet as well that will just support the dramatic devices evident in Hamlet, so that you can actually be incorporating those into your essay and throughout. Okay, so essentially what gives Hamlet the ability to transcend time or remain relevant or be reinterpreted is the fact that it does have textual integrity, and that is achieved through the human experiences or human nature it presents, as well as the techniques used to actually illustrate those ideas. Okay, very similar to all of Shakespeare's texts, which is why he still remains very popular today. So the key thing you want to be doing with this module is they're looking for your personal interpretation. Okay, a lot of students ask whether or not that means you use the word I or me or my. Try not to do it too much. Essentially, your personal interpretation will be whatever you go in and analyze, and then you support with your quotes and so on. Okay, so it's not really necessary for you to use the word, don't use the word I. You can use the word my, but I still wouldn't really do that unless they actually ask you a question about your interpretation. Then you could say my interpretation is that blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's okay, but still keep that to a minimum, because you want to make sure that your writing's formal, and using first person is not very formal. Okay, so keep that to a minimum. But basically, one of the reasons for why there's an emphasis on the personal interpretation is there's so many critics and other people that have written things about Hamlet that, they don't want you just regurgitating what someone else has to say about it. They're interested to know what you've understood from the text and how you've interpreted and, so on. So it's very important that while you could be informed by what other people say about it, that you still kind of make up your own mind and then have your interpretation in there versus, just taking somebody else's and regurgitating that. Okay, all right, perfect. So that's the foundation of the module in terms of what they're asking you to look for. And what I'm going to do now is go specifically into how to get started on forming a personal response or an essay for Hamlet that you can ideally adjust to many different questions, and also if they give you a stimulus. So what can often happen for this module is that they'll give you an extract, and then you need to be able to take that extract, integrate that in with what your response is, and demonstrate your understanding of the play as a whole, with also having a focus on that set, the set bit they've given you. Okay, and there are past questions that you could work on with that. Okay, so just to start with, one of the key things to look at with Hamlet is what is a thing that triggers everything that happens in the play. Obviously it's a play about revenge, it's a play about restoring order and all of those things, but you want to start your essay at the start of the play. And the reason for why, that just sounds so simple, but actually what students often do is they try to structure an essay based on themes. And I don't find that to be necessarily very effective. Firstly, because if they ask you a theme that you haven't really spoken about in, say, a paragraph of yours, then you might have a bit of a struggle linking the whole of what you've prepared back to the question. And of course, you don't have a lot of time to do that. Okay, so that's the first reason. The second reason is all of the themes do fundamentally link to each other based on how the plot progresses. Okay, so a text is always something that, it starts in a certain place, it builds on it, the characters change, they experience new things and so on, and then there's an ending. Okay, so it kind of gets, it's all very much encapsulated, like the whole story of the play, covers everything that could possibly be asked and all of the themes that are going on. So if you actually structure your essay more in a sort of chronological, somewhat like linear fashion based on the play itself, then you're more likely to cover anything that they're actually going to ask. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that you should be using something from every single scene, because that would be impossible, but what you should do is have a really good understanding of the play as a whole, structure it that way, and then if they give you a random part from somewhere in the play, then at some point you will have referred to something to do with that and covered it, and then obviously you'll have an essay that's a lot more versatile based on any question that's asked. So an example would be if they asked you about restoring order, that would be more relevant at the end of the play, because that's when, you know, the King Claudius, who, you know, murdered his brother and committed incest and all of that, like, he is killed, and then that's a real part where, you know, order is restored. However, you know, then you might think, oh, well, then I can't write about all the other stuff I wanted to talk about, like, you know, let's say Hamlet's disillusionment. Okay, but actually, if you think about the play as a whole, particularly in relation to Hamlet and how he develops, you can link it. Okay, so something like, you know, it was the instigation of the chaos that occurred, and then the order that needed to be restored, that made Hamlet, you know, kind of plunged him in this state of disillusionment and you know, like, I'm going to say, like, I don't know, self-loathing because of the fact that he was unable to restore order. However, at the end, you know, based on, say, what he does, but very much through divine intervention, that order is restored at the end. So what that kind of means is you've now been able to bring in the beginning, which is how it all got started, the chaos, the you know, usurping of the king's throne. That's at the beginning that you'll have, and then, you know, Hamlet's turmoil to restore all this, and then what gets resolved at the end. So even if they've just asked you about restoring order, you've now been able to link to some other theme like disillusionment, which may have seemed like that didn't really link to start with, but you can totally link it all. Anyway, that will become a lot more evident to you as we continue on and cover more of the content. But for now, where I want you to start is have a look at, as I said, what happens at the beginning. So, you know, what goes on, what triggers this whole mess, and, you know, how is that illustrated? Okay? So, what you want to do is really start your first paragraph looking at how the political turbulence or the turmoil evident within Denmark has, like, what has caused all of that turmoil. Okay, so we get a lot of images at the beginning about, you know, Denmark is an unweeded garden, and there's all these unnatural things going on. You know, so there's a clear sense that there's chaos that's occurred. So based on an Elizabethan context, that's going to be very much influenced by the belief in the great chain of being, or the divine right. Okay, so the chain of being is the structure of society, which basically, the gist of it is you've got God at the top, and then God gives power or the divine right to the king to rule, and then, you know, you've got all the other levels below that, which, you know, you don't need to worry about too much, because we're really just dealing with the level of the king and the royals. Okay, so, you know, what's really important to look at is, you know, if you've got this divine order or this chain of being that's been established, and then you've got this king that messes with it, right? So we've got, obviously, Claudius murders his brother, which is just horrific on two levels. One, that's his brother, and secondly, that's the king who was chosen by God. Okay, so he's just messed with, like, family, with God, with, you know, the whole order of society. So it's a really heinous thing that he's done. It's like the most heinous thing you could do in this time. Okay, so him doing that has very much triggered the chaos that we see Denmark has been plunged into. Okay, and then obviously Hamlet finds out why that's happened, and then, you know, it's his job to get that sorted out. Okay, so to start with, you know, so that's the first thing. Okay, the second key thing that is really evident is the incestuous marriage that takes place not even a month, as Hamlet says, after the king has been murdered. Okay, so, or king, his father, right? So he's just completely and utterly disgusted by the fact that, you know, his mother and his uncle have got married that soon after his father's death. Okay, so two things there, that really impact or reflect the chaos of the era. And, you know, it just really gives you an insight into Hamlet, like what he's struggling with. You know, like if you think about, you know, the fact that you've got this happy family, you've got, you know, the mother and the father, and then you've got the uncle who seemed to be very close. He had full access, you know, he kind of entered the garden at the king's safe hour. There's a quote about that. You know, it sort of really indicates like an extremely cold-blooded betrayal that happens there. Okay, so for Hamlet, he's got this family and his parents together, and then his uncle, like, he finds out his uncle snuck in and murdered his father, and then he's sleeping with his mum, like, they're getting married a month later. And, you know, like, if you just think about how horrific that experience would be for someone, you kind of start getting an insight into the reaction or the impact that all of that has on Hamlet's mind, okay, which is where it gets really interesting, and something that, you know, I think probably gives Hamlet a lot of its relevance, you know, because we've got obviously the break in the chain of being and the divine right and all of that at the beginning that causes a chaos, very much relevant to the Elizabethan audience, but as a modern audience we're not so fussed about things like that because we don't have the whole royal system and the God chose the king and all of that. What we are interested though is the experience of a human being, right, especially one that has suffered through something that Hamlet has and the impact that actually has on his mind, and his psychology, and, you know, and then anyway we'll go into that after you kind of establish how the chaos happened. Okay, so if you just open up your play and go to Hamlet's first soliloquy. So let's go to here we go. Okay, great. So Act 1, Scene 2, line 129. And look, you know, we're really interested in Hamlet's soliloquies, especially because they give such an authentic experience, or such an authentic view of what Hamlet actually experiences as a human being. You know, in the soliloquies, he's not, you know, trying to be brave. He's not the, you know, prince that he's got to pretend to be, the heroic, you know, saver of everything. In the soliloquies, he's just this man who's suffering through, you know, all the things that have gone on here, right? So I think as a modern audience, we probably value his soliloquies a lot because it gives that real insight, and it's something that we can really relate to, you know, as a common person. You know, we all experience that sort of thing, maybe not to his level, but you know, we really get a good insight into him as just a man and not necessarily a prince or any of those other things. Okay, great. So Hamlet says, "Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw and resolve itself into dew." So like, he's already this early on like, oh, like I wish life would end. You know, or that the everlasting had not fixed his canon against self-slaughter. So, you know, he kind of wishes that he could actually kill himself, but he can't do that because, you know, the canon of the everlasting, which is God, has fixed itself on anyone that actually does kill themselves. So that's forbidden. And we'll come back to that later as well, in the to be or not to be. But look, he's already got this real sense of disillusionment going on. So he goes, "Oh God, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of the world." So there you've got accumulation, weary, stale, flat, unprofitable. You know, seem to me all the uses of this world. Like, there's no point to anything. You know, if you look at those words, they're stale, flat, like no use, unprofitable. So one of the things that you see really emerge is really interesting is actually more of a modern existential idea, like, or experience that Hamlet goes through. So just to define what existentialism is, so it was very much something that came quite prominent in the 1960s, but I would argue that you can see it earlier on than that. It was just coined in the 1960s. But essentially it's a philosophy of life that's very much, I guess, sort of emerged after religion has declined. So if you look at what religion provided people, it was very much structured. So it's like, live like this and then you'll either go to heaven or hell, and it's all very clear for everybody. Okay, but with with existentialism, it's like if you live in a secular society and that structure is taken away. So it's like if there's no afterlife and there's really nothing guiding you on how to live and what the point of anything is, then what's the point of life? Like, what's the purpose of anything? And these are the kinds of questions that very much emerged in the mid 20th century about, like what the purpose of life is, and interestingly, we start seeing that sort of idea emerge in Hamlet. But either way, I wouldn't talk about that just yet. To start with, you just want to establish the chaos that occurs, and then you can go into the impact that has, which is this kind of idea of like an existential disillusionment that he has about, the purpose of his life, of the world itself, and so on. Okay, and a really good quote to look at in terms of this chaos idea is, "Oh, fie on it, ah fie, 'tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed things rank and gross in nature." Okay, so there you've got metaphor comparing Denmark to an unweeded garden, and then have a look at what an unweeded garden means. Okay, so it's sort of a weed is something that's a pest and it's killing off the rest of the things in the garden. Okay, so you've got this sort of idea that something very unnatural is going on, and it's not a good thing. Okay, and then he goes into what's actually going on here. So he just hates the fact that his mother is married so quickly. So like he says, yet within a month, so I've just jumped down to 145 there, and then he says, oh God, which is apostrophe, just so you know. So apostrophe is when something not necessarily present is addressed, and it's to show some real emotion or like some real frustration there, which you can definitely see Hamlet has. Okay, so oh God, a beast that once discourse of reason would have mourned longer. So like even a beast that has no ability to reason or be rational would have mourned longer than my mom. So she's even lower than a beast in this particular scenario from his perspective. Married with my uncle, my father's brother. So have a look there at the way that he's really emphasizing the filial or the family connection there. So my uncle, my father's brother. So really emphasizing, what we call it there. There's actually a name for when a brother kills. I think it's fratricide. That's gone on there. But no more like my brother than I to Hercules. So it's like, what? She didn't even marry someone better than her original husband, and she did it that quickly. Like, what's wrong with her? Within a month. So repetition there, because just so such an incredulous tone about how fast it was. The salt of most unrighteous tears had left the flushing of her galled eyes she married. Okay, so sort of almost saying that she's faking it about her tears. So like her tears are unrighteous because she cried at her husband's funeral, but then she ran off and married his brother just, a month later. So, she's sort of a bit full of it, really. A bit of a faker. So anyway, he's saying that her tears are unrighteous, and they hadn't even left her eyes yet before she married again. Oh, most wicked speed. So you've got personification again, really, emphasizing the speed or the quickness with which she actually got married again. So he's discussed to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. Okay, great. So we can see that that's a big reason for why that chaos happens. Okay, so that was the first thing he knows about. But really, from a contextual standpoint, I would say his discovery that his father was actually murdered is probably even more significant than the incest, but obviously you've got those two key factors. Okay, so if you go to Act 1, Scene 5, it's when the ghost reveals the fact that he's been murdered. Okay, so if you look at Act 1, Scene 5, line 25, Hamlet says, oh God, ghost, revenge his foul and most unnatural murder most foul, as in the best it is, but this most foul, strange and unnatural. Okay, so you've got like 3 repetitions of foul, you've got 2 repetitions of unnatural, obviously strange is in the same sort of vein there. Okay, so that's really again illustrating the chaos that Denmark has been plunged into because of the murder that's happened. Okay, and what's really interesting is Hamlet's initial response. Okay, so he's like, gung-ho about it as a prince should be in this time, according to what we call the medieval chivalrous code. So Hamlet says, haste me to know it, that I with wings as swift as meditation or the thoughts of love may sweep to my revenge. So he's like, quick, tell me all about it, like haste me, I want to know quickly, so that I with wings as swift. So firstly, I with wings, you got a metaphor there. Okay, so comparing Hamlet's experience to having wings, and then you think about the kind of the qualities wings have. Okay, so wings kind of give you the ability to fly. There's like a sense of freedom and even ease about it, which is so ironic because later on he so doesn't do it that way. Okay, but essentially for now he pledges that he's going to do it with wings, and then not only is it enough that he compares himself to acting with wings, he then says he's going to do that with wings as swift as meditation. So there you've got a simile there comparing how quickly or swiftly he's going to do it to, and meditation in this context means like just a thought, like you meditate on something, you just think about it. Okay, so he's just going to do it as quick as a thought, with wings as quick as a thought. Or the thoughts of love may sweep to my revenge. So even that choice of words, diction, sweep, gives you this idea of it being really fast, really easy. He's going to take care of it. It's all a done deal. Okay, good. And then the ghost says, good. So he says, I find thee apt, and duller shouldest thou be than a fat weed that rots itself in ease on Leith Wharf, wouldest thou not stir in this. Okay, so essentially he's using a metaphor to compare Hamlet to being worse or duller than a fat weed that's rotten if he didn't actually rectify this wrong, or carry out that murder in the swift way that he's discussed. Okay, so it's almost, I guess, a premonition in some sense, because I would say that, especially from the perspective of someone from this period, that Hamlet does become that fat weed that rots itself as he goes on, because, he doubts himself, he kind of starts questioning the point of him living, he's thinking about maybe killing himself, like all those things. It's almost like the chaos and the rotting of Denmark has really entered his mind and his psychology. Okay, which doesn't seem like it's going to happen here, because he kind of pledges he's not going to do that, and then he doesn't do anything of the sort. So really ironic. Okay, great. So then he says, now Hamlet, here. So I'm going to tell you the story. 'Tis given out that, sleeping in my orchard, a serpent stung me. Okay, so he kind of repeats this whole idea of sleeping a lot, which makes it even more cold-blooded, really, because there he is, he's there sleeping, he's at his most vulnerable, he can't fight back, so it's really horrific. Sleeping in my orchard, a serpent stung me. So then you've got a metaphor for the serpent. So think about what the comparison is. So you've got a comparison between Claudius and a serpent, and think about the qualities of the serpent to get the effect of the technique. So a serpent is firstly a religious allusion to the devil, and secondly a serpent is something poisonous, has a reputation for, or has a kind of, it's an allusion to being kind of sneaky or, deceitful. Okay. So we've got a serpent stung me. So the whole ear of Denmark is by a forged process of my death rankly abused. Okay, so he's actually personified the whole of Denmark into his ear. So he said the whole ear of Denmark. So he's now saying Denmark. So that's either kind of personification, making Denmark, saying it's his ear, or you could say it's a metaphor again, but try not to use too many metaphors. But either way there, what you see is that it's Hamlet's father was poisoned in his ear, and so it's by getting poison in his ear that the whole of Denmark is being poisoned. That's what he's saying there. So you can really see the influence of the chain of being there, whereby chaos and corruption and all of that has resulted from the actions that Claudius has taken. Okay, so the whole ear of Denmark is by a forged process of my death rankly abused. But know, thou noble youth, the serpent that did sting thy father's life now wears his crown. Okay, so now it's like, here's who it is. Oh, my prophetic soul. So I thought so, like my uncle. And then, it just gets worse and worse as the ghost goes on, and, about the virtuous queen who's, been won to his shameful lust, so that doesn't get any better for her. And then there's all this lewdness, and then he goes into more detail about what actually happened there. So it says again over the page, Act 1, Scene 5, line 60. He's sleeping within my orchard, my custom always of the afternoon upon my secure hour. So it's like his place of being safe. Thy uncle stole, Anyway, you can read through the rest of that, and it sort of gives a really terrible depiction of the heinous crime that his brothers committed. And then he really sums it up on line 25. So he goes, thus was I, sleeping by your brother's hand, of life, of crown, of queen, at once dispatched. So, almost the omission of conjunctions there makes it even more dramatic. So the technique we call that is asyndeton, which is basically listing without really using conjunction. So it's actually kind of, if you see that there, thus was I sleeping by a brother's hand. This actually here, of life, of crown, of queen, that's actually polysyndeton, which is the opposite, and I'll send you the definitions of both. But essentially, like adding the of life, of crown, of queen, that almost kind of it creates a multiplicity to like how many things were taken from this guy in the one instant at once dispatched. And then so you can kind of pick if you want to use asyndeton or polysyndeton, but they both kind of have a similar effect, which is you can see like there's an accumulation of the horrific things that have gone on here. And the fact that it happened at once dispatched is like so quickly, so momentary that, and it's really part of human experience, you could just lose everything. Even if you're a king, the most important person in the world at that time, could lose everything in one moment. and then it goes into, oh horrible, most horrible, so anyway, you got the horror, you got the corruption, and all of that. Okay, so where you want to start is to have a look at everything we talked about in relation to, like, how is the chaos instigated, because then what will happen is you get a really good ability to delve into the impact that that has on Hamlet's mind and his psychology. Okay, where initially he's just like shocked and angry and all of that, so and he starts kind of on line 105, oh most pernicious woman, oh villain, smiling down villain. So I think what really upsets Hamlet probably even more is the lying, that kind of, and that's the whole theme of illusion versus reality, where you've got this villain who's smiling, but he's a damned villain. So there you've got an oxymoron, so smiling damned, that really emphasizes the duplicitous nature of man. Okay, and I think it's a big part, that's a big part as well of Hamlet's disillusionment with humanity just in general, because not only is his uncle lied and pretended to be something he's not, he's then murdered his father, and then he's married his mother, and he's pretending to be this great guy this whole time, smiling and being all pleasant with everyone, but actually he's this ultimate villain. Okay, great, so start with that. So for your first paragraph, I want you to discuss, so just get ready to write this somewhere. What is the cause of the corruption within Denmark? And how does this corruption start impacting on Hamlet's mind or view of the world? Okay, so about 200 to 250 words on that, and that will give you a good start or a really good platform to get into the rest of it. Okay?